2, 3, and 4, which are closed session items we're going to deal with at the end of our regular council meeting. So we'll move right to item 5.2, and if you'll stand and join Councillor Dunn in the singing of O Canada, please. Thank you. Item 5.3, please join me for a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. Item 5.4 is the adoption of the open session agenda. Councillor Dunn, I believe you have that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Seymour Fagan, that the agenda for the open session of the regular council meeting of Tuesday, August 13th, 2019 be adopted as circulated with the following amendments. Additions, business arising from the Planning Advisory Committee minutes, items 13.3.1, 2 and including 13.3.7. Addition, bylaw by consent 17.1.8. A bylaw to amend the Township of Somerville zoning bylaw number 78-45 to rezone the lands within the city of Kawartha Lakes. File D06 2019-016, report planning 2019-043-121 Cowpath Trail, Burke.
Thank you. All in favor? That's passed. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Anything in today's open session agenda? Seeing none. We'll move into item 7, notices and information by members of council. Is there anyone on council? Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is with deep regret that we share the passing of Bill McLaren on August the 9th. Bill has served as a valuable member of the Lindsay Ops Landfill Public Review Advisory Committee since 2015. The city is very thankful for his contributions to the committee, and he will be missed by the committee members and all the staff who had an opportunity to work with him. His obituary is listed under the Lakeland Funeral and Cremation Center, and there's a celebration for life for Bill to be held at the Dunsford Community Center, Lowell Level, 26 Community Center Road, Dunsford, Ontario, Friday, August the 16th from 1 to 4 p.m. Words of remembrance will be shared at 2 p.m. If desired, donations can be made in Bill's memory to Community Care Health and Care Network. Hospice services would be greatly appreciated by the family. I've known Bill probably for about 50 years. He was a very successful businessman, and more important, he was an honest businessman. And he ran McLaren's marina from the time that I arrived in the Lindsay area back in 1968. He ran that business. He was always the go-to guy if you wanted to make sure you were getting a fair price, and he will be missed by his family and his friends. I've got one further announcement. Tomorrow is the official opening of the Elgin Park splash pad at 2 p.m. It's another splash pad for the kids, and that's some good news. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Richardson?
Thank you. I'm getting in here before Councillor O'Reilly. Sunday, August 25th, the Beef and Corn Annual Dinner at the Pontypool Community Center from 4 to 7. Tuesday, August 27th, second annual Music in the Park at the Janetville Community Center from 4 to 8 for the Janetville Athletic Association. Sunday, September 8th, it's the Members Historical Society saluting the citizens over 80 at the Pontypool Community Center. And Sunday, September 15th, an all-day event, the first annual Show and Shine Motorcycle ATV Side-by-Side, brought to you by the Bethany Athletic Association. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of announcements. I'd like to welcome the new business to Omimi, Michael's Cafe. It's an expansion from Lindsay, and it's located right beside the Omimi Library, and there'll be an official opening in the near future. It's a bake shop as well, and certainly a welcomed addition, new business to Omimi. Also, congratulations to Mike and Michelle Cumberland, who purchased the Mr. Convenience and the Coffee Time franchise in Omimi. On August 19th, next Monday, the annual general meeting of the Omimi and District Horticultural Society will be held at the Trinity United Church at 7 p.m. And the Dunsford Library Speaker Series will continue next week's speaker, which will be on August 20th, next Tuesday at 7 o'clock, will be Dave Ellis, who has a collection of Kawartha wildlife photos, and that'll be at the Dunsford Library. And finally, Deputy Mayor Doug Elmsley will be having the roundtable discussion on roads in Ward 6. It'll be held Thursday, September 5th at the Coronation Hall in Omimi at 7 o'clock.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Seymour Fagan?
This Saturday from 11 to 8, we have the Bob Cajun Annual Beer and Food Festival. So if you like beer or food, come on out at Settlers Village.
Great. Councillor Riley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 16th Annual Kawartha Lakes Cycling Tour is the largest cycling tour in the Kawartha Lakes. It'll be held August 24th, and it's sponsored by Boston Pizza and Canadian Tire, and they usually start every year at Boston Pizza. The annual EMS golf tournament will be held at Lindsay Golf and Country Club on August 21st, and it's already filled up. The Lex hosted its third annual national and international horse show the past weekend, to another great success. The annual Labor Day picnic will be held on Sunday, September 1st at noon at the Old Mill Park. Councillor Dunn mentioned the Elgin Splash Pad. Laurie Scott will be in town on Friday, making a funding announcement at 10 o'clock at the Works Depot on the Little Britain Road. The AMO conference will start this weekend. I think there are a number of people who are attending from council. The tribute to Gord Miller will be August 17th, I believe, this Saturday from 5 to 7 in Victoria Park. Gord had his own band, and I think his group's going to be playing there that Saturday night from 5 to 7. And recently I was in Japan representing the city on the 50th anniversary of Twinning with Narrow, with Chair Heather Newman and a number of other delegates from the area, and Allie, what's her last name? Allie Danes was also one of Carolyn's daughter is also there for a summer exchange. And then on the way home, I came home by Sydney and took part in a hockey tournament with 5 other residents from the city of Kawartha Lakes, and managed to win most of our games, if not them all.
Thank you. It's like you've had a busy summer. Any other notices from council? None? How about staff? Anything from staff? Seeing nothing, we'll move down to item 8, matters from closed session. We'll deal with at the end of council after closed. Item 9 is council minutes, regular council meeting minutes of July 16th, that the regular council meeting be received and adopted. If I can get that motion, please. Councillor Seymour Fagan, Councillor Vale, all in favor? That's passed. We'll move right into deputations. We have one deputation today, item 10.1. regarding the parking requirements, additional development of 82 Kent Street West in Lindsay. It's regarding item 14.1.1 on the agenda. Mr. Kevin Duguay is here. Welcome, sir. And I'm told happy birthday.
Thank you, Your Worship. It feels great to be 47. And in Kawartha Lakes with a world hockey champion. Joining me, Your Worship and members of council, is Robert Barrow. Robert is the project manager. We are here on behalf of the owners of 82 Kent Street. We are in receipt of the planning report Plan 2018-046, and we're here to indicate that we are in support of the recommendation. And I thought I'd take an opportunity just quickly, because I'm aware from afar, from my desk in Peterborough, that the subject of parking in central areas, including the town of Lindsay, is a subject of some ongoing consideration. I understand the municipality, if not already, will be soon embarking upon a study to establish a permanent cash in lieu of parking program. And to that extent, congratulations. Had that program been in place, I wouldn't be here on my birthday. We have considered the staff report. There were 2 pre-consultation meetings with staff, with Mr. Walker and others, so we could arrive at an understanding about how cash in lieu could be established for a downtown business that wants to convert an existing basement portion of an existing office space to accommodate additional office space. So there's no building expansion, it's all internal, and it would serve to create more office space for an expanding business. The parking area, in theory, that could support this, well, in fact it does today, is to the rear of the property. There is already today limited parking on this site, but the balance of the parking for the business is either street-based or in the municipal parking facility found to the rear, or I believe it is the north of the subject property. So we support the recommendation. We wanted to make sure council we're here in support, and if there's any questions, I can certainly speak on behalf of the wards. I believe we're vacationing this week, and if there's any technical questions, Mr. Barrow is here. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Walker for his time to meet with us twice to arrive at a mutual understanding about how cash in lieu of parking could be provided and supported in this instance for 82 Kent Street West. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll get a motion to receive. We'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Vale and O'Reilly. Any questions for the deputant? Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support the motion on the surface. I do have some concerns, and I'll be talking about it when 14.1 comes up. I'm happy to see that we are expanding in the downtown. I think we need to do more of that, and I congratulate your client for that. But I do have concerns about the price and parking availability, which I will address when the item comes up. But I have no questions, but I'm just telling you roughly where we'll be coming from. It's an extract that I
Certainly. And Mr. Mayor, if I might respond, as a frequent visitor of your downtown, I acknowledge I don't live in City of Kawartha Lakes, but I do visit your downtown regularly. From experience, I've never had a problem finding a parking space. I was actually at meetings today in the planning office, not a problem. I've had regular meetings downtown. It's just sometimes it's just patience. Maybe have to find an alternative. But from my perspective, it is busy, and that speaks of a vibrant and robust downtown. And I acknowledge that a cash in lieu of parking program is, my understanding, it's underway and would be introduced at some point. Again, and it would eliminate my need to stand here today.
Yeah, I guess that would depend on the value that council decides to put on that parking in lieu of, so be careful what you wish for.
Yes. Well, in this instance, Your Worship, we support the recommendation of staff.
No, and I appreciate that. I did have a quick question about the renovation. It's existing space in the basement that you're turning into additional office space. Is it to accommodate more employees, or is it to accommodate that you're cramped where you are and you want to expand office space to spread some current staff out a little bit more? Or is it a combination of both?
Your Worship, it's a combination of both. There may be some additional hiring, but it's not significant, but it's primarily additional office space, meeting rooms, storage, and the like. There was a permit previously issued for renovations in the basement to establish a dedicated mechanical room, file storage room, and I believe there was an elevator that serves the building, so that's in place. So it's basically what's left, and it's to accommodate a very busy office.
So despite the formula that staff have worked through, it's not really to accommodate 8 more employees specifically who are all going to need an extra parking space, correct?
That is my understanding, Your Worship, yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dunn, you had a follow-up?
Just a quick question, Mr. Mayor. What's your time frame on the actual renovations?
Your Worship, to Councillor Dunn, upon the signing of a site plan agreement, building permit, which I think we're building permit ready now, we would start construction immediately.
Thank you.
You're
Any
welcome.
further questions for the deputant? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. And it is the first report on our agenda, so if you want to stick around for a few minutes, it'll be extracted. We can have a discussion then. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move into item 11, which is presentations. We have one presentation today, 11.1, the Kawartha Conservation Burnt River Floodplain Mapping Presentation. And Ron Warren and Galen Yerriks. I pronounce that right, Galen? Yep. Thank you. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and Council, for allowing us to speak today. For those who don't know, my name is Ron Warren. I'm the Director of Planning, Development, and Engineering with Kawartha Conservation. I'm joined here today by Galen Yerriks and Nadeem Baraka, who is with Ganaraska Region Conservation Authority. And we're here to talk about the Burnt River Floodplain Mapping Project, recently completed and adopted by the Kawartha Conservation Board of Directors. The program itself, I can just figure that out. There we go. The program itself is actually 10 projects in one. We're probably 3/4 of the way through, and the floodplain mapping project started in 2012. This is the completion of the 7th of 10, and so we're certainly in the home stretch. And leading the program is a technical committee, which is comprised of staff from Kawartha Conservation, Ganaraska Conservation, and of course, the City of Kawartha Lakes staff, including your own Richard Hawley. Burnt River, the one we're here to discuss today, is actually one of the stars of the show, if you will, when it comes to floodplain mapping. And as you can see on the graphic there, the event we had in 2019 is certainly a memorable one for several reasons. It was, as it says, longer than any other one we'd had. 3 weeks longer. It produced higher levels of water and certainly more water than experienced in the past. The water levels in 2019 were 20 centimeters higher than the historic flood, the previous known high of 2013. And also of critical importance is the project has shown that the potential discharge and the flow rate of the Burnt River could have been doubled actually this year's flow. So not only was it higher than we've seen in the past, our study has shown that it could have been significantly higher than that even. And all of this represents a clear example, it was about as clear and tangible an example as you can find of climate change actually on the ground. Our experts at staff and beyond tell us that it's actually climate change that has led to an increased frequency and intensity in rainfall events, which, not surprisingly, in turn, leads to an increased frequency and severity of the flooding events. Of course, this is not only true for Burnt River, but true of all watersheds in the community, and of course, right across the country and across the world. These images here represent the last 3 events. Of course, there have been 3 events in the last 6 years. So that speaks to just how frequent it is. And the notes that I just provided tell you how the severity seems to be increasing, and there's certainly potential for it to be even beyond that. We can come back to any of these photos if anybody wants to see them, but they are taken by our own staff, probably by Galen specifically, in the last few years. And it really does show the impact that it has on the community and in Burnt River specifically. And just before I pass it off to Galen, I will note that one of the key reasons for the Burnt River watershed being so significant is, sorry, I just go back once. You can see in the orange area, this provide a, yeah, there we go. This is the Burnt River watershed, and as you can see, it's quite large. It's actually what makes it so regular and so significantly is the sheer size of the watershed it drains. We're looking at approximately 1,500 square kilometers, or roughly half the size of all of the city of Kawartha Lakes, which, as we know, is a very large jurisdiction. And really, that's one of the keys which makes it such a significant area. And just pass off the Galen there.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. So this is the Burnt River study area. We focused the main focus of this study was on the community of Burnt River and all the cottages and homes that are along this stretch of the river. So we're looking at Hillside Drive down to Cameron Lake. And the red boundary there, just for reference, is where we flew LiDAR, which I'll touch on as we go through this presentation. So just so you know where the money's coming from for this project, we received a federal grant through the National Disaster Mitigation Program. It was $66,500 through the program, which was matched by the City of Kawartha Lakes. And we were also successful in receiving NDMP funding for 3 of our other studies: Mariposa Brook, Fenland Falls South, and McLaren's Creek. Okay, just to give an oversight of the process and what we go through in order to make sure that the quality of this information that we're putting out to you guys is good and of high quality, is we have as Ron mentioned, a team of experts for a technical committee. We also have provincial standards that we follow that are set out by Ministry of Natural Resources. And as far as a regulatory event, which gets thrown around a lot in languages, we're trying to, I guess, regulate or get a regulatory flood line that's either the regional storm, which in this case, in our area, is usually the Timmins storm event, or representation, or a big storm represented as the 1 in 100 year event. Through the whole process of collecting all the survey data, as well as doing the models and the technical report and appendices that's the end product, as well as the maps, are all peer reviewed by a senior engineer at a consultant firm that's a third party, so there's no bias in that. Okay, so I mentioned before with LiDAR. So LiDAR is a relatively new technology that we had flown in 2012. It uses a laser essentially to take GPS points on the ground. This is the most cost-effective way to get topographic information, so it's the lay of the land that we can use in our models. So what ends up happening is we literally get 2 to 3 points roughly per square meter, and this information gets plugged into our model. So we'll figure out where how the water flows directly across the land. If you want any more detail, I'm going relatively quickly through these slides, but by all means, feel free to contact me at any time. So unfortunately with LiDAR, at least with the laser that we used, it bounces off of water. So this is where you see me in the creeks around City of Kawartha Lakes collecting channel cross-section information. We need to know the elevation of the bottom of the creek channels so we can incorporate that information in the model. Now, unfortunately, I'm only about 6 foot tall, so that doesn't really help with Burnt River. So we had to hire a consultant and use a bathymetry boat. They used the one actually relatively similar to the one on the right to try to get very high accuracy depth information at the bottom of the river and incorporate that with the LiDAR information and my other survey information. So all of this information actually goes into our modeling. Now, with modeling, it's usually made up of a hydraulic and hydrology or hydrologic model. So you're looking at the amount of water and how fast it flows across the landscape and roughly where it'll go, for lack of better words anyway. We're trying to get the best representation of what will happen in a real life scenario if we were to get a really big storm event. It's almost hard to comprehend actually how much water we'll get in a regulatory event. I'm sure you've heard of Hurricane Hazel or the Timmins storm event. It's a large magnitude of water that will fill up any stream or river, no matter if there's water in the creek or not. It's going to top the banks. There's just too much over a very short duration. So other things that we incorporate into the model are land use information from like our OP and secondary plans, as well as soils, so you can figure out how much water is infiltrating to the ground, as well as ELC, so you're looking at wetlands, forests, things like that. A good opportunity with Burnt River that we didn't necessarily get to use with the rest of our projects was a means of calibration. So since I started, we've had major flood events in Burnt River in 2013 and 2016, and I was able to go out into the field and actually collect high water marks where this occurred. So they're able to take that high water mark information and put it into the model. And they're able to compare, we're able to incorporate about 130 years worth of gauge data of information. So those storms that occurred, or the events that occurred, we were actually able to see how much water was going through that system at that time, and then compare it to the information that I collected. So when we run the model, so I guess the comparison storms would be the 25 and 50-year storm event, we were actually able to compare my real life information to what the model put out, and it was very close, almost dead on. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the final product is what you're looking at here, along with a technical report and some appendices. But here are maps, flood maps. I've got 8 of them for Burnt River, and the red is the actual flood line itself. You'll see a green line on there, that's where the LiDAR boundary was, as well as you'll see 2 different air photos. Now, when we took LiDAR, they actually took corresponding air photos with it so that it matches up with the maps. And then those yellow lines are all the cross sections with flood elevations. So anybody living in these areas, they can figure out how high the water will actually get during a regulatory event, so that they're able to either build or try and get outside of that if they want to expand. So again, if you want, you can access these maps on our website, as well as if you can talk to me, and I can more than happy to deliver them through a Google Drive or personally, whatever you prefer. So just go through.
Yeah, I think there are 8 maps in total through the entire study area, which, as Galen says, will be available and will also be available at our open house.
Yeah. And one thing I actually forgot to mention was there was a study done in 1991 by M&R that identified where the flood line was at the time based on their the technology of the time. So we took the opportunity with updated technology and just better information to make sure that we have the right information, since this is an area of concern. So what you'll see is in my next slide, let's keep going, is actually a comparison between the 1991 floodplain mapping study done by M&R and our own. Now, even though it may be similar, the 1991 study in terms of the extent, however, the updated study better references information and almost uses 30 additional years of water flow information, thereby providing greater reassurance to the quality of the updated floodplain. This in turn helped instill greater confidence in the flood model, as well as for planning purposes.
Thank you. Just have a, more than anything, a summary note sort of at the end. This is the type of thing we're hoping to prevent in the future, although we have a very good idea that things like this will continue to happen in the future. The key is not necessarily stopping the flooding, but knowing where the flooding is going to happen. Really, the key for the project for us was working together with our municipal partners, being aware that the flood exists, being aware that this hazard exists. We didn't create it, but we certainly cannot ignore it. The scope of the project did not necessarily look at creating or referencing any mitigation measures, but to accurately identify and illustrate where the floodplain hazard itself is. This information, as Galen noted, can be quite valuable to a municipality in terms of assisting in the preparation of updating of land use plans, official plans, zoning bylaws, and also in terms of preparing municipal emergency plans and helping the city keep its people, its property, and its investments safe. And with that, we'd be pleased to take any comments or any questions.
Great, thank you. We'll get a motion to receive, please. Councillor Riley and Richardson. Any questions for the presenter? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Riley.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the presentation. When I see, for example, the picture of the burnt river and the building partially underwater, going forward, we'll say in an envelope close to like that, with a new build today, what type of mitigation measures would you need to build in that area?
Through the chair.
If you're allowed to.
Through the chair, the first example would be to try and stay back out of it, to have, when the official plan is updated, when the zoning bylaw is updated, sorry, didn't mean to hand that over to you there, Richard, but it will look at where the flood line is and will recommend being outside of that area. Of course, there are examples, if it's not new build, where we have, say, additionals. Building additions happens in, say, Omimi with some regularity. And so we try and recommend mitigation measures wherever possible. We want to make sure that people can get out in an event. We want to make sure that, you know, the means of egress is right there. Also, building heights, making sure that finished floor elevations are a little higher, making sure there are flood proofing happens, you know, for instance, no basement, for instance, or maybe a basement on the other side of the property where there's a walkout or something's a little higher. And we try and include those things wherever possible. But the best thing is to stay out of it. That's for sure.
Maybe just to follow up.
Sure.
When you compared the 1991 maps to this year, the
Yep.
updated and peer-reviewed maps, could you say that was there a rough percentage of how much land would now not be able to be built on? I know it's
Yeah.
land specific, every lot specific, but there's certainly, is there much difference between the 91 and the 2000 and then updated one?
Through the chair, I would say that there is not a significant difference, to be honest with you. It's based on better data, but there are not significant areas that are included in the flood line now that we're not. Red on this illustration highlights the differences, and some of those were just anomalies and things that were missed in the first study.
Thank you.
Couple things. So you made a comment at the beginning that the discharge flow rate for the Burnt River could be double what we saw this year. And I mean, what are you basing that on? Is that based on the Timmins storm, the worst possible case scenario, or the 100-year storm? Like, I mean, it's just kind of a comment you put out there, and it's hanging. What does that mean? It could be double this year's. What would that be based on? Can you just put some of that in context?
So for this study, we took Timmins storm, which is 500 cubic meter per second. And what we experienced in the 100-year flows, which was in 2019, was around 230 cubic meter per second, so it's almost double that. The Timmins storm, for which we have drawn this map, is double than one which we have experienced in 2019.
Sorry, so the Timmins storm that you base the mapping on would be double the flows, would be based on double the flows of what we had this year?
Yes.
Right, okay, good. The other quick question I had was do you know how many structures are currently in that area within the Burnt River floodplain? I mean, how many current structures right now are within that area?
Through to you, Mr. Chair, it's approximately just shy of 1,000. I think it's about 920 dwellings. And now I don't know if that's
It's approximately
structures?
955 structures that I could count with the 2012 imagery that we have. We haven't received the 2018 imagery, so I haven't been able to do a head count myself yet because I don't have the newest imagery. But if you look into maybe some more, there's property layer, I could probably get it more fine-tuned.
probably close to 1,000, I would imagine.
So a lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
quite a few.
Okay, any other questions for the presenters? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much for
Okay,
having us.
Have a good day. So we'll move into item 12, which is the Committee of the Whole. We didn't have any correspondence regarding committee of the whole recommendations in the minutes. We passed the recommendations at the last council meeting, so we just need that the minutes of the July 16th, 2019 committee of the whole meeting received and the recommendations included in section 12.3 of the agenda be adopted. Councillor Dunn, thank you. Councillor Richardson, all in favor? That's passed. And then the business arising from the, we've already done that. We don't need to do that, correct? Thank you. So then we're over to planning minutes. Planning Advisory Committee, were there any extractions from the recommendations to council? They're pretty straightforward. You'll move, okay, I was going to say you have an extraction. You'll move them as printed. Second, Councillor Seymour Fagan. Any comments, questions? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. That's item 13. We'll move over to consent agenda. So for extractions on the consent agenda, I have item 14.1.1, which is the parking requirements. The additional development of 82 Kent Street, West Lindsay, has been extracted by Councillor Dunn. 14.1.10, the Lindsay Ops Landfill Electricity Generation System Optimization Study, has been extracted by Councillor Ashmore. 14.1.11, the gravel road rehabilitation, has been extracted by myself. 14.1.13, the downtown revitalization public washrooms in downtowns, has been extracted by myself. And 14.1.16, the social services service plan, has been extracted by myself. Any further extractions at this point? Councillor Richardson, I believe you have the consent agenda.
I do, thank you. Consent matters 0813-2019, moved by myself, Councillor Richardson, seconded by Councillor Vale, that all the proposed resolutions shown in section 14.1 and 14.2 of the agenda be approved and adopted by council in the order that they appear on the agenda and substantially numbered, saved and exempt 14.1.1, 14.1.10, 14.1.11, 14.1.13, 14.1.16.
Thank you. Any further questions? All in favor? That's passed. 14.1.1, Councillor Dunn, your extraction, the parking requirements for 82 Kent Street.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll give you a motion to receive the report, and then I may, after several questions, give you a follow-up.
Okay, motion to receive, seconded by Councillor Yeo. Do you want to ask questions? Well,
yeah, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great. Through you to the planner. I've read the report relatively carefully, and there we go. Okay, I was looking back at Richard there. How do we come up with this number where just a year or so ago we were charging $750 for a parking spot? Now we're charging just over $2,000. That's probably my first question, and then I'll go from there.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. The current zoning bylaw treats the downtown area with the same parking ratios as a greenfield development. So what happened in 2007 when Rexall was moving forward with their development, the then Director of Development Services, Richard Danziger, proposed a calculation which would do a couple things. One, it would treat the cash in lieu of parkland requirement as though the zoning requirement was 50% of that laid out in the zoning bylaw. So it kind of gave a 50% credit and then set a value to the parking. So for instance, in that scenario, in 2007, the recommendation was $1,379 per space for 29 parking spaces, and it worked out to a total of $40,000 in essence, for 29 spaces. We fast forward to 2018 when the grand redevelopment came forward. And what I did was built a database that used the exact same formula. The only difference was we provided a 1.01% cost of living increase per year for each of the years leading up to 2018. And again, we've made that same recommendation here in 2019. We're 1 year ahead of that, same percentage increase. It works out to, it takes the base value from the original Fenland Falls zoning the original Fenland Falls parking bylaw, which set a value of $4,000 per space. That's what Richard Danziger used in Lindsay then as kind of the basis for his report. So taking that same value, again, indexing it to the current rate, today that would be about $4,550 or somewhere in that ballpark. The report speaks to that. It then takes the calculation of what the zoning requires the developer to construct on site, and it looks at how many spaces they're providing. So really there's two numbers that we're dealing with here. We take the zoning requirement, in this case, if we go back to the grand redevelopment, they needed 167 spaces, so there's your first number. They were providing 67 spaces. So I think that, in my head, I calculate that's a ratio of around 40%. They were providing about 40% on-site parking and looking for a value for the other 60%. In this development for wards, they are looking for 8 parking spaces, but they're providing 0. So we don't have that same 60-40 split here. We're dealing with 100% and 0%. The way that the formula is structured is it's based on those two numbers. So it takes, again, that base value going back to the 4,000 that Fenland Falls uses. That's the only former lower tier municipality that had a specific set cash in lieu value per parking space. Incorporating that, as Richard Danziger did in 2007, incorporating the zoning offset, so giving kind of a 50% reduction. So in this case, they need 8 spaces. It's treating them as though they need 4 spaces in this calculation at a set value of about 4,500. So 4 spaces times that amount comes out to just over 18,000, which is what the staff recommendation is here. If the grand redevelopment had been, say, needing 167 spaces but only providing 20 on-site parking spaces, the ratio in 2018 would have been significantly different. Their cost per space would have been different. Again, it's based on a formula. So we can put the two numbers in, find out what the staff recommendation would be, but it's, again, based on that formula that council ultimately considered in 2007, and for consistency until such time as the city has approved a specific cost for cash in lieu of parking bylaw here in Lindsay, staff really have to go on the recommendation of being consistent with past decisions.
Yes, thank you. So when we did the grand redevelopment, did we not use the Rexall as the Rexall cost as the as opposed to the 4,000 we used, and I'm going by my recollection of a year ago, did we not use the Rexall cost as the same, as the baseline and then work forward from that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we did. That baseline cost was actually based on a $4,000 base cost per parking space. But once it gets incorporated into the formula, it's based on what they needed, what they provided. So again, because we don't have a zoning reduction for parking in the downtown, Richard Danziger's calculation gave them essentially a 50% reduction, and it wasn't looking for the full cost. They weren't looking then to provide cash in lieu for 50% of the parking spaces, because in that instance they needed 39. They were providing 10 on site. They were only needing to pay cash in lieu for the remaining 29, or about 75% of the spaces. So what it did was the calculation in that day worked out to be a value of $1,379 per space for 29 spaces, but it was treating it as though they were $4,000 a space for, I think, 10 spaces or something like that.
Okay, and did we not do a study after the grand redevelopment to establish what a parking spot was valued at?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. There is currently a study underway that is with the Engineering and Corporate Assets Department. Adam Found is currently working on that study. My understanding is it's a parking study looking at all of the downtown cores. It's going to establish what our parking needs are, and I would anticipate it would also likely determine two things. One, what the true cost of providing an on-site parking space would be in each of those downtown areas. and two, likely determining, and again, this will be a council decision, is how much do you want to value each of those spaces? So you could do it a couple different ways. You could set a value that says we want 100% cost recovery, or you could look at it as low as saying, well, we want to charge $1 for as many spaces as you want, so almost a 0%, or somewhere in between. It will depend, I think, on what the economy is kind of determining.
Did staff not return a report in 2018 and establish that a on-street parking spot was valued at $10,000 and an off-street, like as in a high-rise, was, and I can't remember the number exactly, but 30 plus. Did we not say this is what it would cost if in fact we were creating new parking spots?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is approximately the values that I believe Adam's report did speak to, somewhere in the vicinity of $10,000 for your typical kind of at-grade parking space. Most other municipalities, at least that I'm aware of, do not charge $10,000 per parking space. It would be the same in pretty much any downtown. I mean, you've got a few factors that you would take into account. One would be how much does it cost to actually acquire the land, and then of course, what does it cost to build it? I'm assuming the cost to build it is going to be similar regardless of where you go.
I'm not suggesting $10,000. I'm just saying we're using old figures when in fact we have new figures, and I don't know why we are sticking with the. I don't know why we're sticking with the old figures. Parking availability was discussed by the deputant, and I recognize we have a parking study coming. In the town, municipally owned, we have 556 parking spots. That's what we have. On-street parking spots are being consumed at about 86% as of our latest figures, and off-street parking is around 80%. And this is a snapshot on July 31st. So my question to you is, with the addition of the 100 extra parking spots that are associated with the Grand Hotel expansion and the extra 8 now, where do we get the parking spots when we're already consuming 86% of our parking spots available?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe that's what the parking study that Adam Found is working on will dictate, is what do we need? Do we need to construct any more parking? And secondly, in what format? Do we need it as a parking garage? Do we need it as on-street parking? Do we need it as an at-grade parking lot? Or do we need any additional parking? I don't believe I could speak to that requirement.
I just struggle with the idea of selling something that we know we don't have, be it for $1 or be it for $10,000. I struggle with that concept. Okay, and then my final question to you, and maybe better answered by finance. When I read the report, it says that it goes into acquisition, building new parking spots, and maintenance of existing parking spots. Of course, because I tend to be a bit of a cynic, I'm saying, okay, so it's going to cost us $100,000 to do parking lot number 1. We'll take 70 of it out of that fund and use that first, and then we only have a tax increase as regards to that particular parking spot of $30,000. So for me, it's just the way I read the report. It indicates, from my perspective, it indicates that it's merely going into general revenue and that money is not available for expansion. Would you care to comment on that, or would that be more appropriate to finance?
I will probably, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll probably defer to finance. They may want to speak on that. Just from my perspective, the Planning Act actually sets out that it has to go into a specific fund, and that specific fund can only be earmarked for parking or parking-related projects.
Okay. All right. I think, Mr. Mayor, probably the easiest way to do this would be to vote on the receive, and then I'll give you a follow-up motion.
Thank you. We got a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. Follow-up, Councillor Dunn.
Yeah, I would like to move that this be referred back to staff. There's a whole series of issues I have with parking in general, and refer it back to staff, hopefully for a quick turnaround, because I think all the numbers are there. and to come back with actual cost. I have no problem with, well, actually, I'm making an argument now, so we'll leave that at the motion, and then if I can get a seconder, I'll provide a rationale.
Okay, refer back to staff, second? Refer back to staff, second, Councillor Ashmore? Go ahead.
Okay, we have a parking issue in town, and I have no great issue because I think that, and you're fine, if you want to have a seat, you're good. I have no great issue with the city subsidizing parking because I truly believe that bringing businesses into town, either through the grand development or through Mr. Ward's expansion, that there is value that we're going to receive from that. For me, the question is how much and how much it costs. And to get those types of answers, I need some financial information. I need to know that the impact of us subsidizing at 100% is $4 per taxpayer or $40 per taxpayer. The cost of us subsidizing at 20%. So we need, for me, we need numbers. But what we're providing here, and it's not just downtown parking. Our own housing development on Lindsay Street had to go to the Committee of Adjustment to reduce the number of parking spots. Because we're dealing with people on social assistance, and they don't have 1.5 cars per unit. I mean, they simply don't have the financial capacity to do that. But our parking bylaw requires that they provide those types of spaces. Mr. Garbutt's in the audience. He might at some time in the future look at providing, doing renovations on his third floor and providing accommodations up there, which I think would be a wonderful idea, provide more accommodations. We have no idea what a parking spot's worth. So I think we have to get a comprehensive report. Hopefully we can do it in such a speedy manner that it doesn't interfere with Mr. Ward's development, but I would just like to go back to staff and get a comprehensive report.
Okay. Councillor Ashmore, you seconded it. Do you want to speak to it? Okay. I'll speak to it. I think this is a terrible idea, to be 100% honest. Number one, you know, we're talking about a parking study that we've already agreed to as a council that we're waiting for, which will give us a lot of the information that we're waiting for, and I don't believe until that study comes back that we can make an accurate assessment of parking and where we're going to go with our parking problem. You heard from the deputant that they're renovating a basement of an existing building, for goodness sake. Like, at some point, to me, we're overthinking this a little bit. Put a value on it. They say they're okay with the amount printed. I'm surprised because I certainly wouldn't be. I think what we should do is put a value on it of what the grand was and do it. They're not even going to need 8 parking spaces. They're probably a couple of new employees in the long run, and that'll get us through to our new parking study when it comes back, and then we can look at all the information, financial and such, holding this project up to try to come up with some rationale to put a value on it. We either want to grow our downtown or we don't, and there's going to be a cost to that. So I'm certainly not in favor of referring it back at this point. I think we can. It's not a big enough scope that it's going to have a major impact on anything downtown to worth holding up. So, any other questions or comments? You can sum up, Councillor Dunn, if that's okay. Councillor Riley, go ahead.
Yeah, something on the same lines. Maybe I would ask, is Ian still here? Does it ever, along the same lines, we're trying to, as Councillor Dunn's mentioned, trying to work with our downtown and trying to encourage new business as well. Do you ever take into consideration what people can afford? Is that ever, it's not a mathematical calculation, but when we're trying to attract businesses and keep them downtown, especially now with the Walmart factor, it's not official, but it's more than likely going to come. We're going to have to do everything we can do to protect and enhance our downtown. So I just wondered, do you ever take into consideration the fact that what a reasonable amount is to charge?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's not really one of the factors that the Planning Act takes into consideration for it. It doesn't really look at financials specifically from that perspective. So.
That's council's job, to look at more than just the finances and look at the real world of what we're trying to create in our downtown. Do you want to comment, Mr. CAO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I know part of it was affordability that was discussed prior to the study being launched. Certainly, you heard that $4,000 per space, for example, was established in Finland, and we have heard quite clear that it is a prohibition on expansion and doing business. So even at that threshold, I certainly appreciate the sort of current today market value of parking spots, and Councillor Dunn is very accurate. They're in that $10,000 to $30,000 range per spot moving forward. I think the differentiation on this particular issue is that the whole intent of collecting the cash in lieu is to support the current parking system with the current sort of floor space or downtown businesses that are there. And so that's why the planning department is proposing through this policy, staying consistent with practice. We haven't approached 100% sort of occupancy yet, so it makes sense from a current perspective. The study will then say if you're going to leap forward or have any other major expansion, or you hit that 100%, now you need to invest in more capital to expand. And I think that's where we need to then look at formulas. But it's, I mean, sort of acknowledge that it's a very complex formula. It's not as simple as saying it's $30,000 a spot now. So for every expansion that happens today or tomorrow, we're going to have that relative sort of collection back. It's got to be a strategy that includes sort of general public investment and the businesses that are coming in. But I don't think we would do any justice in the immediate term either to a response back, because we wouldn't have what is the growth and expansion that we're anticipating to then apply necessarily without having that study sort of conducted or completed.
Thank you. Any other questions? You want to sum up, Councillor Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This has been ongoing. 2007 recommendation from Richard Danziger that this be dealt with. That's 12 years ago. This is merely an excuse to get it on the table. It's on the table now because of the application. We'll approve this application, it'll go away, and 6 or 8 months from now, we'll have another application, and we'll say, well, we still don't know it. And that's the part that I'm concerned by. I'll deal with the numbers once I find out what the numbers are. But the problem is right now, on-street parking, as of 1:15 on July 31st, 86% of parking was consumed at that particular time, that snapshot. On the on-street, 80% was consumed with our off-street parking. We don't have an excess of parking. We are past the critical stage. We're certainly at the critical stage. And we just can't keep on dawdling while we wait to say, and it's a great idea. I'm quite happy that Mr. Ward's expanding. It's got nothing to do with him. It's the excuse. It's the reason why we can talk about it today, as opposed to waiting another 6 or 8 months for staff to bring back a report.
Okay, everybody's clear on the motion. Refer it back to staff. All in favor? Motion fails. Follow up. Councillor Riley?
Move the motion as printed.
As printed with the 18,158.15. Seconder? Councillor Yeo? Any other comments? Councillor Dunn?
Yeah, I'm going to speak against it very briefly. If in fact we're going to go this route, then we should be applying the same cost factor that we applied less than a year ago to the Grand expansion.
And I'm going to agree with you, Councillor. I think we've made a decision on the Grand was the last one, and you're correct. Till we have more information, we should stay consistent. That would be $763.63 per space for a total of $6,109.04. And I think the 18,000 is a whole lot of money for what they're looking to expand in their basement. So I'm going to speak against it as well, or not vote for it. Any other comments or questions? All in favor? Hands high, up. 4. Motion fails. Anybody want to move the existing rate from the Grand, $763.63, $6,109.04? Councillor Yeo, seconded by Councillor Dunn. Comments? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Okay, gentlemen. Thank you. Item 14.1.10. Thanks, Ian. That's a tough one to put you in the middle of, and I recognize that. You're limited by the Planning Act and some of the information, and I think Councillor Dunn's bang on. We're all over the place, we need to come up with some consistent answers. So I know when our parking study comes back, hopefully that'll trigger that in the future. So thank you. 14110 is the next extraction, is Councillor Ashmore, Lindsay Ops landfill electricity generation system. Councillor Ashmore?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question to engineering, if I could. The reason why I extracted this was, I'm just wondering why we didn't use our Office of Strategy Management. We have an office here. We have some excellent staff members here who could perhaps do this study. Instead, we've tendered it out, and it's going to be $53,000 study that we're going to be spending. Why we couldn't do it in-house? That's my question through you to engineering.
Well, we had, and just for clarification, we had this argument at budget time, and I think you brought up the exact same thing, and council decided to put it in the budget and have staff do it.
Right.
And that's what this is a tender as a result of that decision. So, that was the argument made at budget time. Council decided to get the consultant to do it, to further with the study, and this is really just following that direction from council, but I don't know if engineering has anything to add.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, with the Office of Strategic Management, they don't have the technical knowledge or experience to be able to deal with this project, and that's why it was consulted out.
Okay, that's fine. Just one more comment. Just on that report, it says to minimize operational costs. So that's what was in that report, 14.1.10, and yet I know budget passed it, council passed it. That's fine. But I'm just saying again that I really think that we should be using our own staff for these studies, and it's $53,000. It's $47,250 plus HST. So I think we're quite capable. I think in the future that we should be using our own staff doing more of these studies. That's just my opinion. But I'll move the recommendation.
As printed?
As printed.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Vail. That's an argument that can be made at budget, and I think you did. I don't think we have the technical expertise on staff to do all these kind of studies, but that's a question that when it comes up at budget, you can. So, Councillor Yeo, the motion is as printed for the generation study. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. 14111 was extracted by myself, the gravel road rehabilitation. All I really wanted in this, I'm fine with the motion as printed, but all I really wanted was a bit of an update from Mike, engineering. This is a 3-year, there's a few questions on the finance, but that got straightened out in the report. But it's really, it's a 3-year project, and I thought it would do us all to sort of hear where are we in this 3-year commitment council's made to rehabilitate some of our gravel roads. So somebody can move it as printed after, but do you want to give us a quick a rundown of where we are, if you don't mind?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. As you mentioned, the program was approved, the overall program was approved in the 2018 budget, broken into 3 phases. 2018 and 2019 works were for ditching, culvert replacement, berm removals, brushing of gravel roads. The 2018 work began in the fall of 2018. However, with the weather that we saw in the fall of 2018, that majority of that work was put over to the spring of 2019. We just completed that work this week on the 2018 work that was approved. So the 2019 work that is in this tender report would begin this fall, much like the 2018 work did. Based on weather completion, it could carry over. We're hoping we'll complete this work, the 2019 work, this fall. The 2020 balance, or third phase of the project, is then the topping up or graveling of some of the remaining roads that were within this program.
So are you confident that the 3-year rehabilitation program that was approved by council, the financing, will be completed within the 3 years? Whether you're running a little over into the spring this year or next year, we'll still within that 3-year window, we'll have completed the rehabilitation as we planned?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. If we do run over on the 2019 work through this fall and into 2020 this spring, the majority of the work in the third phase, all of the work in the third phase is really just graveling work on those roads that didn't receive gravel within 18 or 19 works.
Great. Okay. Somebody want to move it as printed? Councillor O'Reilly, Councillor Yeo. Any further questions for Mike? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you need any more money?
That's out of order, because we don't have any. Any real questions for Mike? Councillor O'Reilly, go ahead. Put your microphone on, please. Sorry.
This spring, put the projects behind?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, based on the spring, we did have a later start. Once half loads did come off, it was a little later based on the conditions that we saw. So that did delay us a little bit this year as well.
Okay, so we have a motion as printed. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Thank you for the update. The next one is 14-113 I've extracted, which is the public washrooms in downtown for downtown revitalization. Again, I have no issue with the motion. A couple of questions before. I'll ask somebody to move it as printed, but I just want a little bit of clarification from the director if I can. We've talked about, this kind of late to get it obviously in our plan and answers back for budget in this fall, and I respect that. We kind of came at you pretty late there. So you're going to bring a report back in Q1 of 2020, but I'm just looking for some assurance. Can you assure us that, till we get those answers and those long-term plans, in 2020, if the need is there, and I think it is, can you assure us here today that we'll have some porta potties on the south side in Cobeconk as a last resort, to get us through until we have a sort of a final plan in place for the Cobeconk washrooms? Is that something that we could work around until we get the final answers?
To you, Mr. Mayor, I believe the questions are directed to me. So we will work with Economic Development, the author of the report, if this is approved, on that. Currently, right now, the porta potty situation in Cobeconk is there is one on the north side of that body of water on a road allowance, so about 100 feet to the north of the Wooden Wharf area. We have asked Economic Development, and we are speaking with the local Chamber of Commerce to see if they can gain permission to have the porta potty stationed on a piece of private property on the south side of that body of water. If that permission is granted, then yes, I can 100% guarantee that we will move the porta potty to the south side. Without that permission from the private landowner, then there is no other location for us on the south side. So it all pertains to having the Chamber of Commerce or the city, whoever it would be, being granted the opportunity to place the porta potty on that land, because the Trent Severn calls that there needs to be a 30-meter buffer from the waterway, and with the exception of the Wooden Wharf on the south side and then the road itself, the city doesn't own any other property on the south side of that water. But with the approval, then yes, we will place the porta potty there.
Okay, so in light of a final or permanent solution, in your report back in Q1 of 2020, you'll have some more information at that time whether porta potties can be temporarily put in place to get us through till a final solution. Is that correct?
Through you to the Mayor, yes. Again, we will work with Economic Development to make sure that a report comes back to Council in Q1 of 2020, identifying what the various options are in both Fenelon Falls and Cobeconk, both for permanent and temporary situations, and for those situations that are more permanent in nature, what a rough capital estimate would be for those.
Thank you. And regarding the Fenelon situation, which were the two that came up at the Downtown Revitalization Committee, I know that in the report, one of the options you're looking at is including the library with the adult education. Adult education is moving out of the Fenelon Library. The library is going to expand over. There is an opportunity there that I know you're exploring with Economic Development to put a couple of washrooms accessible from the outside as one of those options in Fenelon Falls rather than building new ones. Again, is that something that, that we're looking at, or is that something that you're going to report on in Q1 2020, and then it won't be in the budget till 2021, or are we sort of looking at that option as a possibility for 2020?
To you, Mr. Mayor. So again, in talks with economic development and the understanding of the desire for washrooms in downtown Fenelon Falls, there is currently an action and a desire, a need to expand the existing Fenelon Falls Public Library. The space that building is in right now, so it's split in half, used by the library as one half, and the other half was used by the Trillium Lakelands District School Board for their adult education. They are moving out. In fact, they have moved out now. So we have put in the 2020 capital budget request an amount of money to allow for the library to expand into that side of the building. I've spoken with the CEO of the library, and he is agreeable to us as part of that project, if it need be, and if it's desired, and if council approves it, and if it's doable and feasible, to construct washrooms, as you're suggesting, on the outside of that facility to be accessed from the outside. So that will be reported on in Q1 of 2020, and if the budget is approved as we've currently put in, and it's still just in the draft stage, but if it gets approved with those funds approved, then yes, we would have funds to actually implement that program if that was the end term desire as well.
If the funds get approved to implement it in 2020, correct?
To you, Mr. Mayor, correct.
And you would give us that feedback in Q1 of 2020 with the rest of the report when it comes forward?
To you, Mr. Mayor, so you'll probably hear from it twice, because I'm sure it will be discussed during the 2020 capital budget deliberations in November, and then yes, it will be reported on in the Q1 2020 report, as referenced in this report today as well.
Perfect, thank you. Does anybody want to move it as printed? Councillor Yeo, you'll move that. Councillor Vale, any further questions? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you for the update, appreciate it. Our last extraction is 14-116, which is the 2020 Social Services Service Plan. Again, my extraction, directors here, I had a couple of questions. I guess I'm struggling a little. I know we have to do this as part of our responsibility to endorse a plan. I get that, but how do we endorse a plan with so many unknowns coming from the province? And there's a couple of things in here that kind of jump out at me. I'll just list them. Number one, you're going to have budget changes coming from the province, so how do we endorse a plan not knowing what they are? I did notice that the basic income program, in your preface, the basic income program took people off of Ontario Works, and that caseload went down as a result of that. But now that basic income has been canceled, most of those basic work recipients are now back on Ontario Works. But because you're basing, and just correct me if you're basing allocations on last year's numbers, we're actually getting less funding because what you're basing it on was when a lot of these recipients were on basic income, showing that our caseload was down. So if we're getting less income from the province as a result of the province's pilot project, who makes up the difference on that if the province doesn't come through with funding to make up for their pilot project? Does that make sense?
Yes, I'll try my best to address both of those. Mr. Mayor, on the first point regarding the overall budget changes and the in-year impacts, the intent of the service plan itself is more of a descriptive document to describe the strategies that we'll have in place to meet the objectives of the program. The service plan itself doesn't have identify or bind us to specific targets, outcomes, or funding. That is through, we actually have a separate service contract with the ministry, a legal contract with them. This is more the descriptive on how we deliver programs, how we deliver current programs, look at new programs, adjust to the needs of the community based on the circumstances. So there's nothing in the service plan itself that binds us to anything particular right now. We have the ability and actually the expectation for a second year of every service plan, this is always a 2-year plan, to review and adjust as necessary. But we can review and adjust anything in terms of our service throughout the year at any point to meet the needs of our community. So our flexibility and responsiveness remains the same. Regarding the basic income pilot, the reference in the preface around the impact there was put in as a highlight to the ministry. The way that the ministry determines our program delivery funding allocation, which is formally the administration funding, for the most part is administrative costs, as well as employment assistance costs, is based on a formula, a cost per case formula, based on a previous 2-year period. So the 2-year period caseload data used to determine our program delivery funding for 2019 and 20 is for the period of October 2016 to October 16 to the end of September 18, that 2-year period. The impact of the basic income pilot, there's an overlap with that period. So that's just our allocation. The allocation is the maximum funding we could qualify for. Our discussions with the ministry based on, we had approximately 360 cases who, benefit units who went off Ontario Works during the basic income pilot. A large number of those have returned since the end of the pilot. But the impact of that, how that would affect our program delivery funding allocation for that period, we've gone back and forth with the ministry on that. But in the development of our 2019 service contract, our actual contract, we are receiving, and we continue to receive, or actually request less than our full allocation based on our approved city budget. So we are receiving for 2019 the full provincial subsidy that we requested from our original 2019 budget, which is still within our less than our full program delivery fund allocation, which we've yet to finalize with them. We haven't got in writing, this is our revised amount based on the basic income. They recognized our request and our funding request based on our budget, and we are in the process of finalizing that service contract. So there is no net financial loss based on the city's approved budget for 2019 based on that.
So by council endorsing this plan, and I get it's just a plan, we're not committing to service levels, not knowing if the province is going to change some of our funding moving forward. That's a whole separate, this is just a plan outlining what it is we want to do, but we're not committing to a certain service level, not knowing what our funding is going to be from the province. Is that correct?
Generally, yes. We don't know. We are expecting there'll be further changes for 2020, and we don't know what those will be. The social assistance modernization project is continuing at the province, which could include program delivery funding, social assistance funding, the model, basically all aspects of the program. But for
again,
2019, current year, we are not having any reduction based on our approved city budget.
Something happens from the province in the fall and they decide to cut some funding to some of these programs. By endorsing this plan, we're not committing to service levels. We can make that decision at the time, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay,
the plan
perfect.
itself doesn't bind us to it.
Perfect, thank you. Any other questions? Anybody want to move it as printed? Councillor Dunn, Councillor O'Reilly? Questions, comments? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Clear as mud. Okay, that's our consent agenda. We'll go over to correspondence. We have none. Petitions, we have none. Bylaws. Councillor Yeo, you have the bylaws by consent. Are there any extractions from the bylaws? Nope. Councillor Yeo, go ahead.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dunn, that the bylaws shown in section 17.1 of the agenda, namely item 17.1.1, to and including 17.1.8, be read a first, second, and third time, passed, numbered, signed, and the corporate seal attached.
Thank you. All in favor? That's passed. We have 18 is notice of motion. We have none, and we do have to go into closed session, so we'll take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 2:30. We'll go into close to deal with the rest of the agenda.